Warning. Listening to this show may result in increased levels of inspiration, motivation, and innovation. Side effects can include the immediate urge to take massive action to build a better business and life for yourself and others. You've been warned. Welcome to Influencers Radio with your host, Jack Mize.
And welcome back to another episode of Influencers Radio. There's an old maxim in business and in life, I suppose, that it's not what you know, it's who you know. And if you follow my guest today, I think you might agree that the saying should be amended to be, it's not just who you know, but who knows you. My guest today is a former Wall Street lawyer turned entrepreneur, and I'd say the most highly regarded speaker and expert on social influence, interpersonal dynamics, and social engineering. Jordan Harbinger is the co-founder of The Art of Charm, a coaching and training company, and the host of the Art of Charm podcast, which is downloaded over 2.5 million times each month and has been covered by Forbes, NPR, The Today Show, Esquire Magazine, Saturday Night Live, and MSNBC. Jordan, thanks for coming on Influencers Radio today. It's a thrill to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, I want to dive right in here. I think a lot of folks know who you are and what you do, especially folks that have followed you. And I think anyone who's familiar with and follows the Art of Charm would agree that the ability to build relationships and grow the right network will trump technical skill and book smarts every time. But, most people feel it's just some, magic charisma that you're either born with or you're not. And I suspect you strongly disagree with that assumption. Am I right?
Yeah. I mean, the things that we look at as talents and things like that, typically when we start to examine it, it turns out to be a skill. And I think that's an important realization, because when we look at things that we think are talents and mislabel them as such, it kind of gives us a few things happen. First of all, we start to go, well, this person's talented. I can't do that because I'm less talented. And we sort of write them off as being talented, and we figure we can't do this. But what we don't know is whether or not something is a talent or a skill, and we really don't tend to think about it. If one person is able to learn something through study, through coaching, through effort, it's learnable, and that makes it not really a talent. And of course, the counter argument to that is, I know what you're thinking, right? Like, yeah, the talented people are better at learning certain skills. That may be true, but it becomes a defense mechanism to label something as a talent versus a skill, and I think that's unhealthy.
And I think that talent comes into play with, I think our culture. We live in a culture that people assume that their value is based on the minutes of the hour and the hours of the days they're performing some activity, right? Sure. Versus the results. And I think, you put a big spotlight on that. What were the circumstances around you figuring out that relationships, right? We'll get into that. To relationships were far more profitable than that traditional talent, that roll up your sleeves and just scrub harder kind of work ethic that we seem to have grown up with.
Sure. So I used to be an attorney on Wall Street, and when I worked there, it was kind of like I was always a smarter kid in elementary school or middle school. And high school, I was smart, but I also worked harder than everybody else. And then in college, I wasn't necessarily smarter than everybody else, but I was able to outwork everyone. And then I went to law school, and I definitely wasn't smarter than everybody else, but I was still able to outwork them. And I was smarter than maybe the bottom 10% or bottom third of kids or something like that. So I was able to combine it. However, when I got hired on Wall Street, I was not only not the smartest kid in class anymore or the smartest person there by a long shot. I was also not the hardest working, because everybody worked their butts off in this Wall Street firm, and people were sleeping under their desk, and it was madness. And so you lose your competitive advantage. And that was a cold realization for me. And I suffered through that a little bit. I had some imposter syndrome, but I also had some maybe well-founded fears that I don't belong here. They're going to figure out that I don't belong here. It's only a matter of time till I get fired. And I think a lot of people have imposter syndrome. We just did a whole show about it at the Art of Charm podcast as well today. And this is dangerous thinking, not only the imposter syndrome and feeling like you don't belong there, but the fact is losing your competitive advantage is very real. And I was hired by this guy named Dave, and Dave was a guy from Brooklyn that was never in the office, and he had a tan. And I thought, how is this guy a partner? You know, if you're a lawyer, you're supposed to be billing in 6-minute increments. How the heck is there this random guy that he's never even here? I mean, does he work from home? So since he was supposed to be like my mentor or whatever, I asked him, I said, look, you know, I don't get how you make more money than a lot of the other partners. You're so senior here, but you're never in the office. I mean, do you just have a home office and you kind of work from home because your kids are there or something? And he goes, no, I don't even worry about my billable hour requirement. And then, of course, my next question is like, well, then what's happening here, right? What's going on? And as it turns out, he was bringing in all the deals for our real estate department. So he was more valuable on the golf course. He was more valuable on some investment banker's boat. He was more valuable eating sushi with the right people than he was in the office grinding it out like all of the other worker bees and most of the other partners. And that was mind-blowing for me because I didn't understand how value could be had through networking. I thought you worked your butt off, you worked your way to the top throughout the knocks and throughout getting experience in an industry. You met a bunch of people and then ... That was your network. I didn't realize that your network could be built to serve you. And I certainly didn't realize that your network would be valuable in that respect. And so he really showed me that. And that was very useful for him as well as me because I obviously took his lead on that. But when the firm ran into difficulty in 2008, 2009 because of the economic crash, he ended up as a partner in another firm because he had a whole book of business. But all the other partners whose competitive advantage was willingness to work 20 hours a day and specialized knowledge of financial derivatives or whatever, those guys were punished by the recession and they ended up going into early retirement. And so this was fascinating for me. This was a virtual masterclass in the consequences of not networking, not creating great relationships, and not focusing on this. And that gave me, again, a competitive advantage because everybody else was busy with their heads down, which I also was. Everybody was trying to outwork everyone else, and I was trying to play my part in that just as well. But I had kind of a secret third path that nobody else really seemed to know existed. And the fact is, if you're playing a game that other people don't even understand, let alone they can't even see it, then you have a massive advantage. And so one of the things that I tell everybody who's listening to The Art of Charm, where we teach these skills, persuasion and networking and influence and all this stuff, is if you willingly ignore this because you're like, well, you know, my competitive advantage is I'm really smart or I'm really hardworking, and the idea of networking makes me uncomfortable or I don't really know how to do it, and you bury your head in the sand, you're not avoiding the problem. You're just being willfully ignorant of the secret game being played around you. And that's very dangerous.
It seems that the art of charm is well, actually, it seems like it's firmly based in science of charm, right? Mm-hmm. With proven achievable principles. So how duplicatable is the practical application of those principles by folks that might feel a bit more introverted or lack confidence?
Yeah, so we love science-based stuff, and we love things that are based in applicable practical sciences and methodologies. So what I don't like is when motivational people go like, just put yourself out there, or they're like, oh, do this thing that I think maybe possibly could maybe work. That's not good. That's no good. I don't like that. We don't do anything like that here at AOC. And since we've been doing the show for 10 years, we also have a school in LA where we teach these skills to people in person. And so we're able to test a lot of this stuff. And of course, we're also running a successful business, so we're able to put this stuff into action at that level as well. And that's hugely important because, first of all, most people who are giving advice, they don't actually practice anything that they preach, or it's some sort of marketer or some sort of self-help guru. We're not trying to pull anything like that. We're trying to focus on things that actually work and very, very practical. So every episode of The Art of Charm is loaded with best practices from people who are actually practicing what they preach, successful in their own right, and or if it's something just from us, it's always a drill that you can apply right away. So I love mindset and I love success mindset as well, but I love practicals even more because I realize there's nothing really more frustrating than people saying, well, you know, if you just work hard, good things will come to you. That's very true up to a point, but you can do that all you want. And people listening right now who do work hard and think like, well, I've been passed up for this promotion though. This is probably why, because there's something going on around you or in your organization that you're just not aware of. And if you don't get aware really quick and start to work on it yourself, you're going to be one of those people who says, well, I guess it's all about who you know. And they always put a little bit of stank on the end of that. And the reason is because they've been passed over for something that they either think they deserve or perhaps they actually deserve. And so what we're trying to do is showcase the idea that, look, it can be about who you know as well as what you know and as well as about who knows you, but you have to take the bull by the horns here. Don't just sit around waiting, doing good work and hoping that someday everyone realizes, wow, you're so great, we should promote you. There are other people gunning for the things that you want and being proactive, not just minding their own business. And you have to get on that same train. Now, I'm not saying you have to brown nose. I'm not saying you have to schmooze or be a butt kisser. What I'm saying is you have to intentionally cultivate relationships or you're going to get left behind.
You brought up a few good points there. One, the self-help industry, as popular and as profitable as it is, there are people out there that have seen past that, right? They've been jaded. They've listened to it. They've heard the platitudes. They've attempted it, and it didn't work. So, what do you think are the biggest myths or misconceptions about, networking and building relationships that people have? Maybe they've been steered in the wrong direction and tried before, or maybe they just haven't even tried at all. But then they start looking into it. What do you think those biggest myths or misconceptions are?
Sure. So a lot of people think, you got to be born into it. This guy who's ahead of the game, his dad was in this industry, who knew the boss, or maybe not, but grew up around this stuff, so he's got a huge advantage. That's probably the number one myth, the number one with a bullet myth. And the reason that people think that is because there is lots of nepotism, and there are a lot of people that have been born around something, and they do have an advantage. However, those people typically are coasting. Right. And we see this a lot with trust fund kids and kids born into wealth or kids born into connections. They're coasting. They don't have to actively tend that garden, that network. They don't have to worry about it, because what's actually happening is their parents did all the work for them and they're enjoying the benefits. They don't realize how much goes into the back end. If you are actively cultivating relationships, if you are nurturing and watering that garden, you've got your foot on the gas pedal. The other person's coasting. Who do you think's going to get there faster? It's going to start off with you looking at them and going, God, I don't know how I can ever catch up to them. And then 5-10 years later, you're going to be looking back at them and going, how did you squander that advantage? That's ridiculous. It's tortoise and the hare. They're taking a nap somewhere on the course, and you're just trucking along. And if you do that with intention and you have the skills to do it and you have the plan and strategy into place, you're going to be fine. You're going to pass those people, and you're not even going to know they're not even going to know what happened.
Well, I know that the art of charm and a lot of the strategies and just people that say, you know what, I'm in. I know this is what I need to do. And I know you've seen that a lot of the obstacles are fear-based, fear of speaking up, or fear of looking stupid, or fear of just from lack of confidence. So within, what you're doing with the art of charm, the folks that you work with, what are the biggest fears that you've seen people overcome that, they may have thought being known or having that influence was completely beyond their reach before?
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of success stories that come out of things like this. And the usual run of the mill are things like promotions or new relationships, or getting out of bad relationships or bad situations or bad jobs and starting new ones. Some of the things that come to mind, there was one guy who came through the program a while ago, and he had graduated, basically dropped out of high school, and he'd gotten his GED, but he also self-taught himself engineering skills for wireless networks. So he wasn't a dumb guy. This guy was sharp. He just didn't fit in at all in school, and he had low self-confidence because of that. He was largely overweight as well, and he had a rough childhood. So what it happened after the program, and in part because of the confidence and the skills he was able to gain by creating relationships with other people and gaining the skill set to do so, he decided, well, okay, I'm able to go out and make friends. So if I can do that, I'm limited a lot by my weight. I want to shake this weight. I've had it for a long time. So he lost 100 pounds.
Wow.
And then as he lost 100 pounds, he found himself getting into new social situations and romantic relationships, and he ended up with a really nice girl. And so he started dating, and then he goes, I really like everything about my life. I just don't like working for, and he was working for a telecom company at that point in time on wireless networks. And he goes, I bet I could travel more and really get something out of life. And his employer said no. So what he did was he quit his job and he decided to become a consultant for that same employer. And I think he got like a 2.5x raise in salary by doing outside consulting rather than being salaried. And not only that, he was able to work while he was on the road and negotiate to do this all remotely. So he's lost 100 pounds, started his own company, gotten a 2x plus pay raise. Then he's traveling around the world with his significant other, and now he works at Facebook and he loves his job. Whereas before, he was an overweight guy who dropped out of high school and saw himself never getting promoted beyond where he currently was as an engineer. It was kind of an amazing transition. And we see this not because the art of charm, so magical. It's because confidence in one area of your life translates in many ways to other areas. You build self-trust. If you can become athletic after your whole life of being overweight, couch potato, what else can you do? And you start inevitably asking yourself that question. And if you're able to create and form relationships and you're able to create opportunities for yourself, it's kind of an oyster that most people have really never thought to approach. There's a lot of people that think they're stuck where they are, but they're not stuck. They're just not working on the right things. Does that make sense?
It does. And when I listen to a story like that, the first thing that I think of, and I'm sure a lot of people have on their minds is, is this something that, you snap your fingers? And I know that you're very firm and open that what you do is not magic, but how quickly can people see this evolve? Is there a principle that they learn very early, what you're teaching them that makes a big difference that lets them build on? Or is it something that all of a sudden one day they just realize that, whoa, wait a minute, I'm doing things I never would have done before?
It is definitely an evolution. And there's something that's very, very important to highlight, because yes, there's definitely an evolution to this. It's not something where I came back from my day-long workshop or I listened to 3 episodes of the Art of Charm podcast and now I feel better about myself. It's not like that at all. It's very much a realization of creating better first impressions using nonverbal communication. A lot of people are obsessed with the first thing they say or how they start conversations. It's all nonverbal in nature. A lot of folks think, all right, I got to start following up with everybody. So they grab a bunch of business cards or something like that. That's not how it works. It's about creating real relationships, developing real rapport with the people that you meet, proactively trying to meet the right people by putting yourself in the right situations, taking yourself out of time-wasting situations. So, for example, when it comes to relationships and in the corporate sphere, and the personal sphere for that matter, what a lot of people do is they start going to quote unquote networking events and they start meeting people and they hand out business cards and those people hand them business cards. And then they send a follow-up email with some silly thing like download my PDF now. And it's really irritating. It's all surface level. They're not even there. It's just robotic stuff. That's it. And the way that we have to fix that is by putting ourselves, first of all, networking events are not where people with any sort of value go to create relationships. It's where people go to sell products and services to other people under the guise of creating relationships. Any networking event that you go to that's not curated, where it's open to the public, anyone can go there, it's going to be loaded with like financial planners and all these people who are trying to sell you SEO services and stuff like that. It's not going to be the type of people that you want to meet. You have to be very targeted with this. And the way that works is go to curated events where people have to be invited. If you're not invited, volunteer to maybe work at the event is a good way to get into it. There's a lot of things that people are trying to do to put themselves in front of others. And a lot of it's bluster, and it just doesn't work. Other things that I think are common mistakes that I think people really need to focus on are things like nonverbal communication, verbal tics, and confident speech. And a lot of people that want to meet with other people, they meet other people that are influential, higher ups, et cetera. They're not really presenting themselves in a confident, measured way. And that's hugely problematic because nobody wants to be around somebody who makes them feel awkward. Nobody wants to be around somebody who's trying hard to get people to like them. It's really, really, really uncomfortable. And so we like to hang out with people that make us feel comfortable, that make us feel at ease and at home. And those are the types of people that we like to call friends. And so it's about making friends and keeping those friends true, keeping those relationships real. It's not about flybys at a conference. It's not about handing out business cards. It's not about making an email list. A lot of that is kind of internet garbage where there's a veneer over the person and it's like, oh, I'm this persona that's online. Those people are not the relationships that you need and want. Those people are usually flash in the pan. We're playing the long game here. We need to play the long game. We need to be thinking about 10, 20 years out, not what can this person do for me next week. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think it's extremely important. And I think, I'd want to put a spotlight on the fact of how important that is, that you are in it for the long game, because we can go to the opposite end of the spectrum. And you mentioned something about, people that, think, God, just listen to a few podcasts. I think about folks like that study pickup artists, right? Let me just read the first 3 chapters. I guess the opposite end of the spectrum of people that I'd say maybe have unjustified confidence might be it. I don't know. And I know guys like this. I know the people that, that can talk a good enough game to get themselves, into trouble, but only about halfway out. And it reminds me of something that I've seen in your background, that you've traveled around the world. You've been through the war zones, and you've actually managed to get yourself kidnapped twice. So is charm and going into the understanding the underlying science and principles behind this, is charm, is that the reason that you're still with us here today?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely had a couple of close calls, and unfortunately, we don't have the opportunity to go through both of those stories here on the show. But yes, the last time, which is a weird thing to say, the last time I was kidnapped it was mostly targeted by. I lived in Serbia. I was an English teacher. I was targeted by their state security apparatus because they thought I was a spy. And so I ended up talking my way through this situation, generating rapport, humanizing myself with these guys enough to create an opportunity where I could escape. And that was – a lot of people have this weird misconception of the word charm. It's either – using the right fork at dinner, or it's some sort of weird form of manipulation. And it's neither of those two things. It has to do with the essentials of savoir-faire and what to do in a given situation. And again, not just using the right fork, but this is a game of knowing exactly what to do next in order to achieve a certain result in relationships. And that's great in the beginning, in the early stages of relationships and things like that. It's really bad if you live your whole life with your significant other trying to manipulate them into doing things. So don't get me wrong here. Most of what is charming about any given individual is going to be something like their level of vulnerability, right? The level to which they're willing to open up to other people and make themselves vulnerable so that others can connect with them. It's not about being super persuasive and influential and getting people strong-armed right where you want them. It's about showing enough of who you are so that other people feel comfortable enough to open up and they know, like, and trust you. And then you have a real relationship there that's worth exploring.
I think right there, what you just said, because there's so many people that, especially in business, that I need to convince people I'm the expert. To them, charm is I need to present perfection. I need to disguise or mask the flaws. And I think what you just brought up, and one of the principles, the science behind this, is that the flaws might be the charm, right? The flaws might be what disarms people or ingratiates you to people. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's not even just the flaws, it's the willingness to show those flaws. Everybody's flawed. It's just that most of us are busy trying to figure out how to show that we aren't that way. And that doesn't work very well. There's something called it's right on the tip of my tongue. I'm blowing it here. And it's ironic because it's about this exact same concept. What is, and you might be able to help me out here. What is that concept whereby somebody becomes more attractive if they're already attractive and they make a mistake? You know what I'm talking about? It's the pratfall effect. That's what it's called. It's called the pratfall effect. And so, and it works in two different directions. But what we're talking about here is if you are able to showcase, and it's not only the pratfall effect here, but if you're able to showcase competence in many other areas, but then you open up and say, look, I just really don't know what I'm doing with this situation and I could use some help. It becomes so endearing and attractive, and it builds quite a bit of rapport with the people that hear that, because they're only looking at you up to that point, maybe in a two-dimensional way. And after they get through there, they go, oh my gosh, this person has the same thoughts and fears and hopes and dreams and all this other cliched stuff that I do. They're a real person. I like that. That person makes me feel safe because I don't have to pretend to be somebody that I'm not around them, because they're also not perfect. That's the foundation for a real relationship. And it's very, very hard to fake that, at least consistently over time. And you wouldn't want to anyway. Yeah.
And I think it makes it much easier when you're not spending all your time and energy trying to hide that or mask that. Exactly. I've got to ask anybody that's seen you speak, and or listen to your podcast, you present these ideas in a way that it's easy to get. It's easy to grasp. It's just something that's very mesmerizing about listening to the way that you unfold these ideas. And a lot of people associate that with that's what they need to achieve in order to be able to be successful at this. And I remember when I was a kid, I see Arnold Schwarzenegger and I think, man, if I, worked hard, I can transform myself into this bodybuilder. And then I found some pictures in a book. This is pre-internet, some pictures in a book of him when he was 15, and he was already had pythons and was completely, just built out. Chest, there was no before picture for Arnold Schwarzenegger. Tell me that there was a before picture for Jordan Harbinger, the person that we see today and the person that we hear sharing these principles. There had to be a time that you didn't have that. Was there a time when you didn't have the confidence? Was the time that you thought that you had to discover this stuff? Were you always outgoing? Were you always able to speak with people and start these conversations?
Yeah, definitely not. I definitely was well, first of all, when I was in middle school, I was one of the shyest kids around. I had social anxiety through the roof. I mean, that's pretty normal for middle school, but I was beyond normal. I mean, this is clinical levels of insecurity. It was really unhealthy. I started skipping school, and I started focusing on computers, and I was doing all kinds of legal and illegal things on the computer at this point in the early 90s. And that's actually what led me to these kinds of discoveries. Because my earlier discovery, I was so shy, I would skip school because I didn't want people to talk to me or look at me, and it was always uncomfortable. And I started figuring out how the phone systems worked and things like that. And I started to listen to other people's phone conversations, and I hope the statute of limitations is passed on this. However, I started to look at the way that people interacted with each other, and I heard one of my neighbors getting a divorce, and he would talk one way with his soon-to-be ex-wife, and he would talk another way with his brother, and another way with his buddies, and another way with his sister, and then with his mom. Of course, he was like this crying little boy who'd been wounded, and I just thought, wow, if he talked the way that he talks with his mom and his sister to his wife, he wouldn't be in this mess. And I remember thinking that at age 13 or 14, and that was really a big realization for me, because I thought to myself, wait a second, how come adults suddenly are three-dimensional? And I realized, because we're only seeing one side of people, the side they want you to see. And it's not accurate. It's really not how it works. And that was just, for me, that was mind blowing. And so I started to study people, and I started to study the way that people operate and the things that make them tick. And it became just this area of complete fascination for me. And of course, I got derailed and became a lawyer instead of some sort of sociologist or psychologist, which would have been probably more up my alley. However, the study of law was very tangential to this because law is made up by people and it's designed to guide behavior. So it actually worked out for me in the end here. However, yeah, the before picture was crippling social anxiety, not outgoing at all, unable to speak and look people in the eye, afraid of my own success. I remember getting invited places by girls when I was in high school and thinking, oh, they're just going to make fun of me. That's what this is about. They don't actually want to hang out with me. And I remember doing that over and over and over. And after I got to college, meeting with some of those same girls in classes, and they would say things like, how come you always ditched us in high school? Like every one of my friends had a crush on you. What was that all about? And I would be thinking, oh, wait a minute. You guys actually wanted to hang out with me? I thought you guys were going to like throw water balloons at me or something when I showed up, you know? And I just had such a low opinion of myself. And I worked on this for years. And it's always a process, as with everything human. I worked on this for years, and it took a lot of work with nonverbal and verbal communication, bringing myself outside my comfort zone, looking at these ideas and deconstructing them as expertly as possible. I mean, this was something that I just worked on just forever, and it's an ongoing process even now. This is our 10th year of doing The Art of Charm as a show, as a podcast, and we're still working on these ideas. We're still developing this stuff, and it's a process that I don't think will ever stop.
Well, one thing I want to get one last question in. It's I think a fairly deep one because it's one that I've run into so often with so many people that seem to have issues, and you actually hit a little chord on it. You mentioned about being afraid of your own success. And there's so many people, not just in business, I mean, in sales, marketing, but also in life with relationships and dating, that after talking to them, you realize that they're not, rejection isn't what they're afraid of. And you realize that they're more afraid of what if they say yes?
Yeah.
And then what happens? So I want to let you run with that because that is such a huge issue that I think a lot of people that just listening to this right now may realize that's their fear, especially with salespeople. You know, I just sold it. What if they say yes? Oh no, now I got to fulfill. Am I going to be able to do this? Am I going to be able to follow through? Do you see that phenomenon occurring?
Yeah, it's unfortunate because I hate the term like fear of success, but it really is something like that. And I see it in everybody. A lot of people think, oh, I've gotten through that because they're successful and they feel like, oh, it's over. There's always, at least for me, been another level above where you are now. And I find myself doing the same thing where it's like, oh, you know, I should really do this. It'll take my show to the next level, or it'll take my business to the next level. And it's like, oh, well, maybe I'll do that after I do this other thing that's easier or less risky. And you have to constantly keep yourself in check because otherwise you will stay comfortable. And this totally makes sense from an evolutionary psychology perspective. Our bodies want to stay comfortable. That's why we sit on chairs, which is bad for us. We want things that taste good. We want our minds to feel comfortable. That's why we don't go on stage to give presentations, even if it might help our career. Why? Well, I don't know, anxiety, ... whatever. You can get through all that stuff through practice. It's just that the practice part can be really hard. It's like going to the gym. Very few people who start working out love it on the first day. But I think you and I both know plenty of people that work out all the time that can't get enough of it, right? And when they first started working out, they don't maybe remember that time. But I don't know anybody that's in the gym and the next day, during the gym, they're loving it. And the next day, they're so sore they can barely get out of bed. And they're like, oh, man, when do we get to do that again? It's unusual and it's unlikely. And we don't know that many people who do that. And the reason is because our bodies and minds like to stay in our comfort zone. And that's where that fear of success comes from. Nobody's really afraid that they're going to end up with financial independence or a great relationship or a business they love. Nobody's actually afraid of that. They're afraid of getting there. They're afraid of the process that it's going to take to get there. They're afraid of the rejection they're going to face along the way. And they're afraid that they might not deserve what they want at some level, sure, but they're mostly afraid of the steps that they're going to need to take to get there and what failure at each one of those steps might entail.
You know, Jordan, I've seen you do some remarkable things, and more importantly, I've seen you help others do some really remarkable things that they just isn't think possible. And so I know a lot of people, there's so much great information on theartofcharm.com, but what can people do? What's the best way for people to find out what you've got coming up and get more deeply involved with the Art of Charm? Because the resources can help so many people get past some obstacles that have been just crippling them for a long time. And I think Art of Charm is a great place to find answers to that. What are some options? Sure.
So you're listening to a podcast right now. Definitely search for The Art of Charm wherever you're listening to this show. Would love to have you as a fan. I would love to have people listen and experience some of the growth. Check out some of the practicals that we've got. And if you're not sure if you can get to this, for some reason you're listening to this and you're maybe on your friend's podcast player and you don't know what podcasts are, you can always go to theartofcharm.com. We actually have a challenge where we're taking people through 30 days of different exercises to get outside their comfort zone. And they starts really small, of course, little by little, and then moves up as the time goes by. It's actually super interesting to see people's growth, and me and the rest of the AOC team is in the Facebook group that's associated with this. That's at theartofcharm.com/challenge, or people can text, if they're in the USA, they can text the word charmed, CHARMED, to 33444. That's the phone number, 33444. Text the word charmed and it'll say, cool, send us your email. We'll send you the toolbox episodes of the show, which have our nonverbal communication and all that, as well as the challenge. But yeah, I mean, look, no need to go crazy with it, but you're listening to a podcast. The easiest way is just to find our podcast in iTunes or wherever you're listening.
Fantastic. Jordan, I got to say, one, thank you for coming on and sharing this information. And two, I know you make a lot of time to spread this information to folks. I want to thank you for that. You really are changing a lot of people's lives and influencing a lot of folks that go on to influence a lot of folks. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, folks. If you haven't listened to it, the Art of Charm podcast, find him, follow him. You can't go wrong. Until next time on Influencers Radio, remember, you are the only real game changer.
You've been listening to Influencers Radio. To get all past shows and updates on future shows, visit influencersradio.com today or follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/influencersradio.